Okay, my name is Larry McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Lisa Haber to discuss the school district's budget hearing, and Vanessa Maria Graber will report on last week's May Day demonstration. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. We've been in budget all week, and there were hearings on Monday, Tuesday, and today. Before we get started, any highlights?
Well, probably, I don't know if I call it a highlight. The sheriff's department testimony was interesting, and it basically provided more ammunition for those who would like to get rid of the office. And today, council held the last department hearing, which was for the mural arts program. And I guess if you're going to, come out of a series of really long budget hearings, having a budget hearing where everybody likes everybody likes the department, everybody thinks the department does a good thing, everybody wants to give it money, and everybody's happy to see the folks from this particular department come and testify. It's a good thing. I guess if you're going to go out, that's the way to go out.
Right, go out on a high note, because everybody, I think, is worn out now.
A bit. I mean, because prior to that, the home initiative was the subject of conversation, and that wasn't quite as joyous. I'll just say that.
So this is their second time before council. They were asked to come back. And for those who don't know, the home initiative's the $800 million borrowing that the administration wants to do to build 30,000 units of new housing. Well,
or 30,000 using this housing, we don't know how much of it's actually going to be new.
Right, preserved or what have you. And there are a lot of questions about that. The first time the administration came, which was April 22nd, 23rd, didn't go so great. Although it was the best I've ever seen them do before city council. I'll just say that. But it didn't go well. They came back today, and honestly, I think it went worse than last time.
Yeah, and I've said this to you, I said this to you earlier today. My goal, once I am no longer a practicing journalist, is to get a job that will allow me to walk into a governmental body and ask with a straight face and with no plan in place to use said funding. I want to be able to ask for $800 million that will have a 20-year debt service that will end up with it being $1.3 billion once it's all paid off, and have no actual plan to do what I want to do with it. I want a job that will allow me to do that and expect that someone will actually give me that money.
So I just want to mention this, and I want to get it right here before we move on. Hold on, I got to pull it up here. Here we go. It's only 30 seconds. So I asked City Council President Kenyatta Johnson after the hearing, how's this looking? How's the home project working? And his quote was, "We're still doing our due diligence on our proposal. We're still meeting with council members. And so although we have an agreement on the vision, we still have a lot of work to do." And I asked him, well, do you think this gets done before the session is over in June? And he looked me right in the eye and said, we still have a lot of work to do. So I think the general feeling around city council right now is that while everybody likes the idea, right? The details are really lacking. And there are a lot of questions about what this is going to be. We're going to talk more about this as we go forward. But I got to be honest with you, Denise. I'd say it's less than 50-50 at this point that this proposal, the legislation for this proposal, is passed before the end of this session.
Well, a series of bills connected to it were sent to council last week, and only one of them was actually introduced, which tells you that council is not really feeling what the administration is putting out at the moment. But, and I say this a lot, at some point they have to stop being the dog ate my homework administration, because you're asking, over the last two budget cycles, you have asked for a grand total of $900 million to be loaned to you to do stuff that you have not fully fleshed out.
And the first time it was for the wellness center,
Mhm.
and council did it kind of on a, we promise you we'll be responsible. They're
Mhm.
not going to do that again.
No, not for $800 million. If they did for $800 million, that would be the most fiscally irresponsible thing that any governmental body that is not the United States Congress has ever done.
Yeah.
And Philadelphia, I mean, I understand that we need more housing. I understand that we need all of these things. But the thing is, you are asking this $800 million for this $800 million for someone to go out and borrow it for you, to the city council representing the poorest city of its size in the United States. And I
Right.
think that we need to remember that Philadelphia has that distinction before we start, rolling up to Bank of America with a whole bunch of bonds that we need to sell, not not at a tax-free rate, but at a taxable rate, so that, quote unquote, they can be paid back more quickly. Who do
Yeah.
you think that tax is going to get passed on to? A whole bunch of people who really can't afford to pay it. And then when you add that to the fact that they're trying to cut the BERT and other taxes, you can see why folks might be saying, hold up, wait a minute, what are you talking about?
Mhm. So a lot more to report on this before the end of the session. So we have about a month left, month
Mhm.
and a week maybe, before the the spring council session is over. It's supposed to end on June 12th. Council President Johnson today alluded to the fact that maybe there would be an extra session if need be. Possibly.
Yeah, but
They seem unlikely to do that, but you never know. They did it last term, so
he'd rather, be taken out and sat on a mound of fire ants and honey covered underwear than have another session. I think
well,
I can think of few things that the council president would want to do less than
and
that.
speaking of people being sat on a amount of fire ants. That's kind of what happened to the administration today a little bit, but
Yeah,
you know, so
but they're used to it.
by now they are right.
Mhm.
You would think that they would know what, especially the second time, right? You know what council's concerned about,
Or at
and
least you should. Or
if
at
you're
least you
smart about
should.
it, you spoke to them ahead of time and said, "Hey, like, what are your concerns? Let's try to figure it out." And maybe it's not perfect, but at least you know where each other's coming from, right?
But the thing is, didn't they also present written answers to written questions to council before they even came in? If you've already sent something in writing to a group of people, they've read it, they've digested it, they've gone through it with their staffs and everything, and they still have questions, that's a problem.
There you
That is
go.
a real problem.
There you go. And I just want to throw this out there too before we move on. Some of the big concerns here are not just the price tag, although I'm less concerned about that than other people.
Mhm.
Long term, this will cost the city what, 1.5 billion when you
Yes.
consider what they have to pay.
1.3 billion.
1.3 billion.
Yes.
Considering what they have to pay on the
Mhm.
bonds, right?
Yes, it's like a
Okay,
$25 million debt service every year.
every year, yeah. I don't have a big problem with that. If this plan works, then fine. That's what it costs. That's what we
Mhm.
had to do. I'm fine with that. However, a couple of the things that we really need to keep an eye on. In the beginning, I really felt this was 30,000 new units. And now
Yeah.
it has changed to 30,000 new or preserved units. We talked a
Right.
little bit about,
And that's where the problem is.
yeah,
If we knew it was going to work and do what we would hope it would do in terms of getting people who need housing, the housing they need, that would be great.
yeah.
But
And
if
you
we
know,
don't even know how much of this 30,000 units are going to be new housing or preserved housing or any kind of housing, if we don't know any of that, how do we know this is going to work?
well, based on the information that we were provided, less than half will be new. About 16,000 units would be preserved. And I have two serious questions here. What is the definition of preserved?
Mhm.
If we put a new heater in somebody's house, is that preserved? And that's a big deal. And I support all that. I'm 100% in favor of programs like that. But
Mhm.
that to me doesn't count, right? Like that's something we should be doing anyway. And we have programs that exist to do those things.
Mhm.
Also, is the administration in the city going to take credit or incorporate into their total what PHA does, the Philadelphia Housing Authority? So if the housing authority has 20,000 new units, does that count towards the
Mhm.
total? And if it does, what are we doing with this $800 million? Where does that go? So
Uh,
these are questions I have that I'm still not
and
sure.
they're very important questions, especially since the whole putting a heater in someone's house is something that could have been covered by the 10-year tax abatement if folks had marketed it properly to
Mhm.
everybody who was not a developer. And two, is is the new heater going to go into a house where somebody else is moving in? Because to me, when I hear preserved housing, I think of housing that's been abandoned that we're going to fix up and we're going to make it livable for people to use, in
That's what I
addition
think.
to like new housing that we're going to build. If we're
Right.
going to preserve housing by fixing up places that have been abandoned, but still have a good structure, and we're going to do that, then terrific. I'm totally down with it. But we also we have a serious housing crunch here.
Yeah.
And what no one seems to have, figured out in any way or even wants to talk about is how much of this is actually going to be affordable. How
And
much
what
of
is the
this is
definition?
actually right? How much of this is going to be able to be used by people who are making $7.25 an hour and $290 a week before taxes?
Yeah.
How much of this housing is going to be accessible to them? Because if it's not going to, if not enough of it is going to be accessible to them, the problem that we have, the main problem that we have here in Philadelphia in terms of housing is affordable housing. And this doesn't solve that. And if we're going to throw $800 million at a problem, it needs to at least come close to solving it.
Right. Right. So there's a long way to go on this. There's a lot to clear up. I'm not sure. And remember, now this is all on top of budget
Mhm.
right now, right? Like because the budget process isn't over, even though the hearings have ended. There's
Mhm.
still the back and forth between the administration and council about what gets funded, things get moved around, which is
Mhm.
what happens everywhere. Like there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how it works.
Right.
But there's a lot happening right now, and I'm not so sure. You got to get the budget done first.
Right.
The budget is not dependent upon the home initiative being worked out. They're separate entities, so it's not like you have to do both. Home initiative, especially if budget negotiations draw out, home initiative could be, council could say, listen, we're not doing it now. You can do it in the fall, unless they want to do the rare summer sessions. But I don't know if there's an appetite for that,
No,
especially.
and to be honest, maybe by the fall, you'll know exactly what you want to do with this money.
Well, and there's something else I just want to mention really quick too. This is another big concern of mine. So the money is coming out in two $400 million tranches.
Mhm.
I have a big concern about that because if you take $400 million out, you have to spend that right away. The reason you have to spend it right away is because you don't want money that you're paying interest on to sit in a bank account and not do anything. And I
Except on
remember,
interest.
well, the interest you would earn is less than what you'd be paying in debt service. So you would lose, is my belief. This was one of the issues with NPI, the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative. They didn't want to take the money out unless it was going to be spent. And I agree with that, right? You do that when you need the money. Are they going to be able to spend $400 million day one? I don't think that's going to be the case.
No.
That's a huge ask, especially for something that's not really built out yet. So those are some of the things we're keeping an eye on. We're going to let you know what's going on. Again, right now, I'd say less than 50-50 that this happens before the end of the session, but we'll see. Now, keeping with budget, Denise,
Woohoo!
we are going to talk to Hall Monitor Education correspondent Lisa Haver to talk about last week's budget hearing, the school district budget hearing before City Council. Lisa, how are you tonight?
Good, Larry. It's good to see you. Hey, Denise.
Hey.
Stay tuned because I think I have an even better job for you than the one you mentioned, at which I will get to. But if you'd like to make over $500,000 to CEO one charter school, you're in the right city.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So more on that later.
I've been saying for a while, Lisa, that the way to get rich quick in the city is to open a charter school.
Yeah.
Which is why every once in a while I think about, starting the Hall Monitor Charter School.
Yeah.
You're about 20 years too late. Sorry about that. But you can still become a CEO. So yeah, to jump to the beginning, yes. We, the members of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, were in City Council last week. We were testifying. Members of the Board of Education, Superintendent Tony Watlington, senior members of his staff were also there. And, it's good to be there and hear what's happening, but every year I have to say it's frustrating for a few reasons. The way that these hearings are set up, on Tuesday, the people that I just mentioned, the people in charge of the district, come and they make a presentation briefly and are mostly asked questions by members of City Council. And I guess part of it is like, we're so used to not getting answers when we go to Board of Education meetings. And then you think, oh, okay, maybe we'll get some answers here. But I'm sorry to say that did not happen. One reason is, I'm going to just be honest, that too many of the questions that are asked by council members are not what I would call well-informed questions. We've been doing this year after year after year, and it almost seems like you're starting out on a rerun because some members of council have been there for a while are just sort of saying the same thing and then being satisfied with the same non-answer and then they're done. The other issue that I commented on and other people commented on is on Tuesday, and when the important people are there, most of the council members are there. On Wednesday, which is set aside for public testimony, parents, students, educators, community members, there at any given time when you look around, there are fewer than 10 council members, and that is not the way that it should be. I mean, these are council's constituents, and the other problem is the board president, members of the board, Tony Watlington, and staff are there on Tuesday. And so when people testify on Wednesday and they bring up issues, it would be great if the members of the board and the members of the administration were there, and then the council president or any council member could bring them back and say, okay, this person from the Alliance to Restore School Libraries, known as Parcel, is asking why do we not have school libraries except for 3 magnet schools? But there's nobody there anymore to answer that question. And
I just want to mention that really quick. How many schools in the city have librarians? 3.
So one
Three.
is Central, and one reason why Central has a librarian is they have a very, very strong council. I mean, alliance,
Like an alumni
alumni
association.
association. Thank you. And they, I guess, 15, 20 years ago, actually, paid to build a whole new library at Central, and they certainly weren't going to have this whole brand new library without a librarian. So I believe that part of that librarian's position is paid for in donations. The other school is Masterman, and the other school is Sadie Alexander, which is known as Penn Alexander. So, I don't want to say we're used to not getting answers, but we know we're not going to get answers. But, when we talked about libraries, a couple of the council members, including, I'm pretty sure, Councilman Jim Harity, responded and said, well, that's, you talk to people, but as I said, the people who are making the decision to not spend money on libraries, they're gone. And really, this board, some of the members of this board have been on this board for 8 years. So if you've been around for 8 years after the end of state control, and people have been asking you at almost every meeting, we want libraries, at some point, somebody should say, here's why we're not going to have libraries anymore. But it's just not said.
I feel like it's always this, we're really working hard to try to do that. And and the whole time I've been aware of this, and the whole time you and I have been talking, I don't think anybody's ever made any progress here.
No, because now I will say this. The members of Parcel, the Librarians Association, did get to be with some members of senior staff, I would say like last year, maybe 18 months ago. And so they got a grant through the federal government. And I think you know what I'm going to say next.
It was cut?
Yeah, it was, the chainsaw. But to their credit, what I have been hearing now is that the district is going to pay for that. It was only like $120,000. So they are going to do that. So
and their budgets.
Yay, school district.
And with their budget, we're talking over $4 billion this year.
It is I believe, $4.96 billion budget. But that grant is to explore the possibility of bringing back school librarians. Like, just bring back some school librarians.
Yeah, how about instead of spending the money on a study, why don't we hire a couple? How about that?
Yeah.
And maybe this tells you how old I actually am, but the fact that we are actually discussing whether or not a school has a library, it still just boggles my mind.
Yeah, because it's so wrong, and we shouldn't just accept that. And APS members don't accept it, the Parcel members don't accept it, we don't accept it. But the board should say, here's why we are not, in 8 years that we've had, here's why we didn't bring back any librarians. I think people have a right to know that.
And I want to be very clear about this. There might be some people who are saying, well, why do we, in the internet age, why do we need libraries? And I was a teacher, and I'll tell you the reason. On the internet, you have less than 1% of what's available in a library. There's databases, the books, all that sort of stuff. You can't get that on the internet. And even if you could, you need somebody to help you find it and understand what's important. That's what the librarians do. It's vital.
And librarians, I want to say, librarians are certified school librarians. They are teachers.
Yes.
They are teaching children how to use a library, how to use books, how to do research, which changes all the time. And I think some people think, well, there's a whole internet out there, but there's also the whole other side of this is like a library is a special place. Kids like to, kind of sit around and look at the books and take a book out that, but why don't we get answers? And why do people not get answers on what is happening with school closings? I did bring that up in my testimony in council. And I believe I got some response on that too. And it's not, again, it's not like somebody says, hey, we need librarians. And then somebody else says, no, we don't. Because I have never heard anybody get up and say, don't listen to them. We don't need librarians. I mean, nobody's against school librarians. And it's the same with the school closings. I do not know, me as a person who goes to every single board meeting, I'm going to one tomorrow, the Goals and Guardrails meeting. I'll go to the policy meeting, all of them. And I am still waiting for somebody to tell us why the board is intending to close schools. And it's not about the budget. And they even said at the beginning of the process, this is not a budget issue. And in 2013, when they closed over 20 schools, that was not a budget issue either. It was not. I think people's, well, it's not about people, it's about misinformation. But why do we not know why they intend to close schools? Even the School Reform Commission had better information to people, because people knew at this point in the process what schools were being targeted and what neighborhoods. There were hearings all over the city. I shouldn't say hearings, there were meetings, because when a public school is targeted for closure, the people in that school community and the people in the city of Philadelphia actually have no legal standing to try to sue and stop the district from closing their school. In contrast to when the board, which it hardly ever does, but in the rare instances when it tries to close a charter school, there's years and years of court action that a charter company can take.
Well, something that you said in your column yesterday kind of struck me, particularly in light of the budget hearings and with the other stuff going on in the school district. You said that council's Committee on Education has not had a meeting this session?
No, and I checked that out. I looked it up, and I also thought, okay, maybe even if their website's wrong, talk to people who go to those things regularly. And no, and I hate to say, but that's not really anything new, because even under the previous iteration of council, when Maria Quinones Sanchez was chair of the Education Committee, there were hardly ever meetings, even during the nomination process for the members of the board, the new members of the board. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in education, and if things are happening and people go to the board, it's frustrating because people can't get answers, and then the Education Committee of Council doesn't meet, and then there's budget hearings, and people show up and they testify and they have good issues, and some of the sorry, my cat just knocked over its food. And some of the council members were really responsive, but as I said, when you look over to chairs of the people who could answer you, they're empty. So it's really a big problem that people are kept in the dark. And as I said, one of the things that was not raised, or raised very, very briefly, was the issue of charter schools. And you really cannot talk about the budget for the school district of Philadelphia, which again is an almost $5 billion budget, 1/3 of which is going to schools that have been privatized, which we call charter schools. And you can't really ignore the sector of the district, which is spending like 1/3 of your dollars, and then not talk about that, or talk about the lack of oversight, or talk about, as I mentioned earlier, what APS does every couple of years is look up how much administrators in charter schools are being paid, which in many cases you could say, what are they paying themselves? Because even though there is a board at their school, it's really the administration that runs the school. And again, unlike public schools where you can go to one place on the internet and you can find one list of every single person that works for the school district of Philadelphia, from, Dr. Watlington, on down up to every teacher, custodian, et cetera. And you can find out what they make. If you want to know that about charter school CEOs, the only way that we know of is to go to the IRS 990 form, which means for every single school, you have to go and find that IRS 990 and write down the information. And it's very eye-opening. And so far, I found two, Mast Charter School, which has 3 schools up in the Northeast. That CEO is being paid salary and compensation package about $510,000 per year for 1 year.
And what does the superintendent make?
The superintendent in Philadelphia makes 335, I believe is the latest figure. So if you take the CEO of Mast salary and compensation, even before you get to the other compensation, that CEO is already making more than Dr. Watlington.
And he oversees 215 schools, something like that?
About that. I think it's 214. Yeah.
Yep.
And another CEO of Global Leadership Academy. Now there's 2 GLA schools. The CEO that I am talking about is the CEO of just one. And she is up to also about 510,000 for one school. So Denise,
Well, the question,
really, yeah.
well, that would be a good, I guess that would be a good retirement. But the question I have as you're telling me this is, how much of a percentage of that school's budget is that? And could it, and why isn't there, like, for want of a better way to put it, a guardrail to make it so that such a significant chunk of a school's budget isn't given to just one person, when that money could be used to make sure that the kids have, all the, education stuff they need, go on field trips, those kinds of things.
I want to say this like briefly, because you could really talk a long time about that whole issue. But over the past 25, 30 years, it has become apparent to just about everybody that privatizing public schools did not work. And we talk about this in the context of education. But in my opinion, and from what I have seen and all the research I have done, schools were not privatized in order to give kids a better education. Schools were privatized to take public assets and move them to the private sector. And we're talking about real estate, and we're talking about the contracts, because, as I mentioned before, APPS, along with Philly Power Research, did a research article about the entrenched patronage system. I mean, financial and political patronage system that has grown with the expansion of charter schools in the city. And so when you hear, council members grilling the Board of Education on their, alleged discrimination or problems or things of that nature, when you have a very large and entrenched patronage system, you have lobbyists and you have PACs and you have people who are paid to go and talk to city council. Parents at elementary schools, they may have home and school association, but they don't have that really kind of lobbying power that the charter sector does. So that's kind of the overall question, maybe, Denise, to a lot of the questions about that. And unfortunately, rather than the board saying we need to reform this, we have to stop renewing schools that don't meet academic standards and have financial improprieties. we have to really reform that. They're going the exact opposite way. They have really just, when they talk about Project Rise, I'm pretty sure you heard that, Larry, Rise to Excellence. I forget what it's, Rising Up to School Excellence, it's some acronym, but it really is a real, like, very disappointing capitulation of the board, who was appointed, all of them appointed by the mayor, to the charter patronage system.
Yeah.
Now, I just got an email that says that the Education Committee did have one hearing. It was on April 4th, and it was a joint session between itself and the Committee on, it was Children and Youth, and it was talking about exclusionary school discipline and the use of collective punishment practices in public schools. But that's the only meeting that I could find.
Right. There was a joint committee meeting of those two committees. But in terms of, having an education committee meeting to talk about, the school district or the board, or that, nothing like that has happened in 2025.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I always look for is when we talk about a large budget like that, really any budget, what are the aspects we're really talking about? And I believe it was Superintendent Watlington said that 80% of the budget is for staffing.
Yes.
Well, I can believe that.
Well, we don't make widgets, the district doesn't manufacture something. It's, goods and services, and the school district provides service. And,
the school district, and we've talked about this before, has, well, what was at one point a $7 billion capital liability to replace buildings and things like that. It's probably more than that now. That's an older number.
Yeah.
So when you look at the composition of the budget, does it make sense to you? Do you have concerns? And we also have long-term concerns because they're talking about a deficit next year.
There definitely is a deficit on the horizon, and unfortunately, for as long as I've worked for the district, been paying attention. I mean, the question is, like, when is there not a deficit? We had the bare bones budget, the doomsday budget, and it's concerning because I think people kind of like tune it out, because it's like saying, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and the school district underfunded. And I think that's really a problem that you go, oh, okay, yeah, but it really is a problem. And to its credit, the district actually did dip into its rainy day funds rather than cut services. But, my frustration one of my frustrations with the board and also with council is you hear allusions to the federal budget and what is going on with the new administration, but I don't think, at least not publicly, I am not seeing like we need to do something right now and we have to talk about this. But I think, a district and a board that operates in secrecy, I don't think they don't think that way. They don't say, hey, let's, because I've brought it up and other people brought it up, and hey, as these 100 days marched on, like, we need to talk about this. We need the board to talk about it. But at just about every meeting, I'm going to say for at least the past 3 board action meetings, when we apps write our report, we talk about the fact that there's no deliberation on the official items, which can total, or usually do total, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
At the last meeting, board member Chow Wing Lam asked a question about one item. She was concerned about the bidding process, and she voted no, and as did board member Joyce Wilkerson. That's a rarity that there is any kind with this iteration of the board, because the previous board did talk.
Board member Joyce Wilkerson, we're not so sure.
We can't even get into that one. But acting board member Joyce Wilkerson, yeah, it's just hard to say, you have the confidence of the people when you're really, from libraries to school closings to charter reform to, just what we're spending money on, they don't talk about. And, you know, as I always say, we need an elected school board.
Right. Well,
There's
Lisa,
no question in my mind.
tell us
Yeah.
where we can learn more about apps.
Lions for Philadelphia Public Schools. Well, you can always run into us at a board meeting. I'll be in the aisle as usual, holding my sign. We're on Twitter. We're on Blue Sky. We're at appsphilly.net. And anytime people are talking about education, you know, we will be there.
All right. Well, Lisa Haber, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Mary. Thanks, Denise.
All right. Well, we want to thank Lisa for being with us. Now, Denise, before we bring Vanessa on, I just want to give a quick update on something. Last week, we played a clip, 2 clips actually, from City Council member Anthony Phillips, where we talked about due process. Today, or maybe it was yesterday, Anthony Phillips gave a nice discourse on the City Council floor about why he believes in due process and how important it is. So I think that's progress. We were going to have Councilmember Phillips on the show this week. We had arranged that with his office last week, but we haven't heard back from them. I'm sure that's just an oversight. So hopefully we'll hear from them soon. But now I'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Great. It's been a busy week for everybody. We've been in budget all week. I know you've been busy. So tell us what happened last weekend.
So last week on Thursday, May 1st, it was May Day, also known as International Workers' Day or Labor Day around the world. Fun fact, that originated here in the United States. And the holiday commemorates the long struggle of the labor movement and all of the organizing and wins achieved by labor unions in the United States and around the world. And so every year in Philadelphia, there is usually a huge rally and march commemorating May Day, usually led by local labor unions and other social justice organizations. And so last week, I went to the For the Workers, Not the Billionaires rally, which was organized by the AFL-CIO. And there were more than 5,000 people there. And many of the people who attended were there to see U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. And as you might know, he has been making the rounds on a tour across the country called the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, where he's been partnering with U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to talk about oligarchy and the Trump administration and fighting the billionaires. And so I was there right in front of City Hall while many of you were sitting in council. We were outside listening to members of different labor unions speak, hearing U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, and then going on a march, which ended at the intersection of Broad and Vine Street in 70 arrests of demonstrators who did a sit-in because they were blocking traffic. So I made a video as I was talking to people on the streets. So let's take a listen to what they said. Hi, this is Vanessa Maria Graber reporting for WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia and for the Pacifica Radio Network. We are here in Center City, Philadelphia, in front of City Hall for the May Day rally. There are thousands of people here assembled, mostly representing local unions. We just heard from representatives from different local union organizations, worker-led movements, and we also heard from Senator Bernie Sanders. There have been a number of topics that have been addressed today, especially about labor movement, worker rights, and oligarchy. Let's take a listen to some of what they said.
You're an incredible crowd. I'm so excited to be with you today on May Day. Again, my name's Danny Bowder, and I have the privilege of being the president of the Philadelphia Council AFL-CIO. Folks, we all know that a better world truly is possible. But we also know that we can't rely on politicians alone to fix it. We are the many. We have the power. not the billionaires or the oligarchs. We, the workers, we have all of that power. And we're so strong with our power when we are together in solidarity like we are today.
Hello, can you tell me your name, where you're from, and why you decided to come out here today?
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm from Norristown, Pennsylvania, and I'm here because I think unions are really important, and I want to be supporting unions on May Day, which is really Labor Day around the world.
Brothers and sisters, what we are celebrating today in May Day is, in a sense, a sacred holiday. And all over our country, workers are coming out demanding justice, and all over the world, in dozens of countries, workers are standing up to oligarchy and demanding a world in which all people have a decent standard of living. Today, we remember the struggles and the sacrifices of workers for hundreds of years who have stood up to powerful special interests to create a better world. And today we thank our brothers and sisters in the trade union movement for continuing that struggle.
My name is Eric, and I'm out here because I'm not a fan of the whole Trump thing.
My name is Neil Heyman, and I'm his brother, and I can't support the oligarchy. So.
And today is May Day. What does May Day and solidarity with workers mean to you?
Well, we wouldn't have half of what we have if it weren't for unions.
We need to make sure that everyone's treated fair and that they're safe.
This is supposed to be the United States of America. You know, in the United States of America, it means everybody is welcome. Everybody. I'm afraid that we're sliding into 40s Nazi Germany.
How about you? What concerns do you have?
I feel that at some point my grandchildren are going to come to me and say, why didn't you stop this? You knew that it was coming. Why didn't you get together and then make it go away? One thing we can do is let people know how we feel and how we're against it, and make it vocal and public.
My name is Stephen DeLuca. I live in West Philly.
And tell us why you decided to come out here today on May Day.
I wanted to come out here because because Bernie was coming, but because it's a rally about labor and about fairness and about justice, and so I wanted to come out here and support that. And I'm glad to see not just silver-haired people like myself, but younger people of all ages, all races. I'm happy to see people from Mexico out today. I lived in Mexico for 4 years. They have a strong labor movement there. They have a good government there right now. So yeah, I'm happy to see all the people that are out here.
This is Vanessa Maria Graber for WPPM 106.5 FM and the Pacifica Radio Network.
All right. Well, Vanessa, that looked like a great event, and we know a lot of people attended.
Yeah, it looked to be about more than 5,000 people. Of course, many more people were there when Bernie Sanders spoke. Quite a few of them left after Bernie was done speaking. And then a march that started out in South Philly, which was organized by several immigrants' rights organizations, met the rally at City Hall. And so you saw many different folks from immigrants' rights movements. And there was also quite a few folks protesting in support of Palestine. So you saw lots of Palestinian flags and keffiyehs. And there were also a number of socialist organizations. So it was a pretty diverse crowd of people, a lot of different ages, people from all over the area. And thankfully, the weather was good, so people were out there in the sunshine listening to all the speakers.
I just want to point something out. Every once in a while, I'll get a question about this flag over my shoulder here, what this means. That is one of the flags of the Industrial Workers of the World, a labor union of which I am a member. and my ancestors were members. The IWW went to Hazleton, Pennsylvania, upstate Pennsylvania, where my relatives were working in the coal mines and helped organize those coal mines. And that's one of the reasons why I'm an IWW member today, a dues-paying member of the Freelance Journalists Union, and why I have that flag, and why I am a big believer in labor unions and solidarity, because that's the only way working class people can exert their influence if they're organized in a way to do so. And that seems to be making a comeback. At least that's how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, at one time in the United States, the labor unions wielded much more power. There were a lot more unions. And of course, we know throughout the 80s and early 90s that there was a lot of union busting happening. So the unions, even though they have a long history with many wins, have not wielded as much power as they once did. But like you said, I think there's a resurgence of that. There's a lot of new unions that have been formed, unions representing cooperative workers and freelancers and emerging new industries. And so for folks who are not aware of what the labor union is, and I have a little list here that I'd like to share, again, because younger people or people maybe from other countries, people who are not as familiar with the labor union, maybe don't know why May Day is significant. So when we think about an 8-hour workday, 2-day weekend, and overtime pay, again, those were the result of movements from labor unions who won those rights. The minimum wage, right, in New Zealand, that was the first country to mandate a minimum wage in 1894. And the United States didn't follow suit until 40 years later. So that's a pretty big deal. And at that rally, there were many calls, including by Senator Bernie Sanders, to increase the minimum wage, which is still at $7.25. In states like New Jersey, they've raised the minimum wage up to $15. So Pennsylvania has a really big gap in comparison to New Jersey. Child labor laws, right? Like the reason why children are not working on farms and in coal mines is because of child labor laws. Before, there was no paid vacation or holidays or even sick time. And even more recently in Philadelphia, workers organized to get sick time pay. Healthcare, right? Like the reason why we have any healthcare at all, even though some might argue that it's still lacking. But that has been a really big win. Anti-discrimination protections, especially for marginalized groups. The Equal Pay Act, that is a result of organizing from labor unions. The right to go on strike. Safety regulations or workman's comp. And protecting public education. So those are just some of the things that we have won as workers from the organizing and direct action from our labor movements. Of course, there's many more wins where that comes from, many really historic court cases and things that are currently being battled out in the courts. But again, let's not take for granted all of those rights that we currently have as a result of all of those union workers who organized, went on strike, many of whom were beaten and arrested so that we can have that those protections today.
Now, you mentioned that 70 people got arrested during a march for blocking the highway. Did they block a specific highway? And
yes.
How did the police respond to that?
So, I'll first start by saying that there wasn't a massive police presence. So had it been only a rally for Palestine, for example, we would have seen a very different police presence. And so that was one thing that was really interesting. There was hardly any police around. The march went all the way down Broad Street to Broad and Vine, which of course has the entrance to 676. That is a place that has been blocked before. So they sat in the intersection of Broad Street. And it was organized by members of AFL-CIO, I believe. So there were many union members. Representative Karuski also got arrested. faith leaders got arrested. This was pre-planned and organized with police. The police were aware that people were going to sit down and block traffic. And most of the people, they anticipated getting arrested. And so they went away peacefully. No major issues there. This is not typical of many direct actions in Philadelphia. And actually, I was having a conversation with a friend who also noted the difference. And she had not been living in Pennsylvania for a while. She had just moved back from California. And she said, well, what happened with the police? And I wondered, we wondered together if this is a result of the new police commissioner. Of course, we saw the former commissioner, Danielle Outlaw, handle these demonstrations and police interactions very differently. And we all remember how protesters and journalists were tear gassed in that very same location at Broad and Vine back in 2020. And so maybe this new police commissioner has a different approach.
Well, that's kind of why I asked, in light of what happened in I think it was 2020 with the protesters that were on the street, and that the New York Times ended up, putting it on video, what happened with them. That's kind of why I asked. Another question I had was, you were talking about the level of unions that were there. I guess I saw Unite here, and you mentioned the AFL-CIO. Were there other unions involved in this?
Yeah, we saw members of AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. We saw health workers there. There were members of other building trades unions. There were city workers there. And so there definitely was a variety of unions that showed up in full force. And we also saw a lot of students participate as well. Not clear if they were also representing student unions like the adjuncts and the faculty at campuses like Penn and Temple. But yeah, it was a pretty diverse crowd and a large showing of unions that we haven't seen for some time.
Now, did anyone mention, because I know Bernie Sanders talks a lot about Medicare and Medicaid, and we're hearing that there might be serious cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. Did that come up at all during his May Day speech? And if so, I guess, what did he have to say about it?
Yes, of course. Bernie Sanders talked a lot about the right to health care, again, promoting universal health care, warned about the draconian cuts being proposed by DOJ and, the Trump administration. And I think he was, really encouraging people to organize and fight back against these cuts, and talking about the seriousness of these threats to Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and many other vital programs that are on the chopping block as the U.S. Senate considers these rescission cuts put forth by the White House.
And we're getting close to the end here, so we have about 30 seconds. Vanessa, is there anything else we should know about this event?
I think, again, there were a lot of new people there. So I interviewed quite a few people. Only a few made the cut in this video, but I talked to many more folks who had not been out to a protest in a really long time, folks who had participated in these hands-off protests organized by Indivisible and Move On. And so I do think that there is a growing and emerging movement of people who are taking to the streets now that the weather is good to express their opposition against oligarchy and the Trump administration.
All right. Well, that's good to hear. I want to remind people that next week is the public testimony portion of the budget hearings. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, you can go make your voice heard at City Council. In our newsletter, we'll have more information about that. Thank you all for being with us, including Lisa Haber and Vanessa Maria Graber. Well, Vanessa, you work on the show, but I'm thanking you anyway. And Denise. All right, we'll see you next week.